In this video, I'm going to show you a simulation that I've got going here to try out a basement crack finishing product. It's unique in that it doesn't just fill the crack, but it also reinforces the crack too, and you'll see that. This is my simulated cracked concrete basement wall. It's 2 concrete blocks. I've put in wood spacers here. The gap is about 1/8 of an inch or so. Bound it all together with these clamps. This is what they call a semi-solid block. So we get the flat face on both the front and the back. The block is actually filled, partially filled here. It's hollow on the ends, but it's filled here in the middle. So we have a pretty close simulation of what a basement crack would be like. And I'm going to go through the 3-step procedure for using this product. But before I do, I just want to explain it a little bit. So this system is by a company called Drycore. They make some great basement subfloor tiles. They also happen to make my favorite wall finishing panel for a basement. It's insulation and finished wall surface all in one. But their crack product has 3 steps. As I said, this first step is to actually seal the crack superficially. So we're not filling it yet. We're just going to be putting this epoxy coating over the crack so that when we do go to inject, the filler is not going to come out the face of the wall. So this is the inside face of the basement. That's the crack. We've got soil on the outside. Now, we're going to be sealing this before filling, except for the installation of these injection ports. The idea is that the port is the only way that the filler can get in. Now, normally, you'd put a port like this about every 18 inches along the crack. This is almost 16 inches from here to here, so technically we would only need 1, but I'm going to put in 2 so that we can inject into 1, and if all goes well, we should see the filler as it penetrates the full depth of the crack starting to come out here, in which case we can seal that port and then start filling here too to complete our operation. So this is going to be epoxied in, covered over, sealed, ready for injection. So step 2 is the actual injection, and it takes a 2-part cartridge as well. I should have mentioned this before, but here's the application gun. It squeezes out both sides of the cartridge at the same time. In this case, this is not epoxy, but expanding polyurethane, which is exactly what you want for something like this, because unlike epoxy, polyurethane loves moisture. It actually works better when there's a little bit of moisture around, and since we're dealing with a basement wall, there's going to be a fairly high moisture content in the masonry. So this is perfect, and polyurethane also does something that epoxy doesn't do, and that it expands. In this case, this particular formulation expands by 18 times, so it should be more than capable of penetrating the whole width of the wall. So step 3, and this is where the unique part of this campaign comes in here. Step 3 involves the application of carbon fiber fabric. This is extremely strong in tension. So in tension, I mean by pulling apart. And you will see later in the video, we're going to apply another kind of epoxy, a bonding epoxy this time, to the masonry. And then we're going to put some of this cloth over top and then saturate it with more of the same epoxy and let it cure. Now this, as I said, adds tremendous tensile strength to the crack. So much so that I'm told, anyway, that the bond between the carbon fiber fabric and the masonry is actually stronger than the masonry itself when it's been applied to bare masonry, and that this is saturated with the epoxy and the bond is complete and optimal. The crack will not open up again. If the foundation continues to move, you're going to get a new crack in a new place. So this is really as strong as you can ask for. So let's get started. So now it's time to start with the step 1, this 2-part caulking gun of sorts. You can see the two passages are divided there, and the mixing will occur because of the baffles in the nozzle. so no exterior mixing is required. It would be a lot easier for me to do this job with my simulated blocks horizontally, but that really wouldn't be accurate, so it's vertical. And let's just see. There we go. Look at the colors coming through here. You can see them getting mixed as they work their way along. Okay. Now, the main thing here is that I retain a passage. I don't want to have that clogged up. There's a little bit of oozing that has partially covered the hole. So when I finish my work here, I'm going to poke something through there to make sure that it's open. It's open now. I just want to make sure it's fully open. Okay. Now, this is not the sealing step. This is not the filling step, rather. But I do need to cover, I do need to fill that gap in some way, just superficially though, because the actual filling is going to happen later. Now normally, if this was an actual basement wall and it wasn't perfectly bare concrete, if it had some paint on it or some efflorescence, or the concrete was spalling a little bit, I would apply an abrasive, a cup wheel of some kind and a grinder to get down to some bare concrete. So just going to tool this on. We've got our crack sealed. Our injection ports are in place. It's going to take 6 to 8 hours for this to harden. So this is not something that you can do all in one day. But just as a final step, before I continue and just set it aside, I'm going to make sure that we're open all the way in here. That's pretty important because it has to be open in order to inject. There. Now, later, after injection, I'm going to knock these ports off and we're going to remove everything that's on the surface, because for step 3, we want full bonding to the actual masonry. So when we're done, step 2, we're going to grind so that all you see is the filler in the crack, and then bare clean concrete on the other side, ready for optimal bonding with the carbon fiber fabric. So epoxy is one of those things that's messy to clean up, and the dry core people have these Pro Mighty wipes here too. They're supposed to take care of epoxy as well as adhesives, resins, and caulking. So it doesn't smell too harsh. I mean, there's a little bit of an odor to it, but it's quite a strong, kind of textured thing too, a little bit abrasive. But there's definitely a solvent here, so let's see how well it cleans up stray epoxy. Well, quite well. Certainly better than regular paper towels, that's for sure, because of the solvent, and I think the abrasive texture also works pretty well too. So you might want to have a can of these along if you tackle a repair like this. Well, at this stage we're pretty much finished step 1. We've got the epoxy covering the crack. Before I go into the actual filling of the crack, I want to point out a couple of things. I've let this sit overnight. It's rock hard now. We could have done the filling 4, 5, 6 hours after application. The purpose of this is to stop the filler from oozing out. These ports here need, of course, to be open all the way into the crack, like this is. It's possible for epoxy to cover that hole up. These are clear, but if they weren't, I could just drill them out. There wouldn't be much to drill through, just a little bloop of epoxy that's hardened there. Now, if you're concerned about lining these ports up with the crack, once you can't see the crack because all of this stuff is on, there's a tip. If you get a skewer like this, or a toothpick, or a popsicle stick and you jam it into the crack before you put the port on, that will show you where the crack is, because many times they can be erratic and you don't really know exactly where they are. So you can put that in, that'll show you where it is, and it'll also stop the port from slipping down before this has a chance to grab and start to firm up. So that's the scoop for the injection ports. So just before I go on, I want to show you an interesting thing. I didn't use very much of this tube, maybe 1/3 of it or so, but because the mixing occurs in the nozzle, I can take this off, and the components are still separate, so they're still liquid. I can use this again. The nozzle's toast, of course, it's just rock solid right now, but you can use this for multiple applications as well. So let me explain something else before I get to filling. Now normally this would be the inside of your basement, this would be the outside, there's soil here. But in our simulation, the crack is open at the back, and I'm concerned that the filler will just ooze out here and not fill the space properly. So I've used some hot melt glue to fasten that piece of wood. We can pry it off later, just to verify that the filler has in fact gone all the way through. So I've got step 2, the 2-part expanding polyurethane cartridge in the gun, and now it's time to start injecting. So I'm just going to keep pumping slowly until we start seeing something coming up the other port. Now I can see we've got a bit of a leak there. That's no matter though. Oh, I can see it's starting to show through, just starting to show through on the other port. I'm going to stop there on this bottom one. Now, before I take it out, I'm going to get this plug ready, because if I didn't put a plug in there, we would lose a lot of the filler out here. So relieve the pressure on the gun. Pop this in here. There we go. And now I'll continue my filling on the top. But it has reached all the way up there, which is a good thing. Now, I would normally have another injection port further up the wall to see how far the filler's gotten up in that direction. Since I don't have that now, I think I'm just going to give it another couple of shots. And then pop in another cap. So I'll let this cure, and then we'll come back and take a look, see how well it filled. The injection has fully cured. A couple of things surprised me. One, there's a lot of expansion power here. I mean, the filler, polyurethane foam, came out of a little gap there that I didn't know existed. I was concerned or wondering whether it would fill the whole gap, but we don't need to take off this strip to know that it got to the end. In fact, I probably could have put in about half as much as I did, because I ended up scraping off a bunch of the foam here. But we're ready for the next step. And that would involve knocking these things off, and finishing the surface, bringing this back to bare concrete. So let's just see what happens here when I... Well, that was easy. Okay, now I'm going to be going at this with different abrasive tools. I'm going to do it outside because I don't want to fill the shop with all kinds of dust and things from this. But let's go and clean this up, get ready for step 3, which is the application of the carbon fiber fabric embedded in an epoxy adhesive. So I think this turned out rather well, don't you? I've removed the epoxy sealer on the surface, and I'm down to bare masonry, and that is so I can properly adhere the carbon fiber cloth. It's got the epoxy that secures it needs to be able to soak in to bare porous masonry like this, and that's what we've got. Now this third step, the carbon fiber step, is not, strictly speaking, it's not absolutely necessary, but it really does add a lot of tensile strength to the repair. Now this is a cup wheel. This is the tool that I used to create this surface. It's a diamond wheel. It's especially meant for surfacing concrete, and it just goes in a regular grinder like this. So let's get some of that carbon fiber on right now. So this is the step 3 epoxy, and I'm going to be just applying it to the surface here. This is not sufficient on its own just to squirt it out like this. I'm going to be using that little roller to spread it around. I want a nice coat. In order to be strong enough, this is supposed to extend about 7 inches from the center of the crack. So that means we're dealing with a 14-inch wide piece here. That's the way it comes on the roll. That's nestling in there nicely. The roller is a big help here. You wouldn't want to try this without a roller. Now, the carbon fiber is on there, but I want to make sure it's fully encased as it should be, so I'm going to put on another coat here. So we'll let that harden. We'll come back and see how it looks. Well, as you can see, I've taken the clamps off. The blocks are holding together quite well. I'd be surprised if the results were any different. This is the kind of thing that I cover in my online basement finishing course. So if you're a homeowner and you want to hire a contractor intelligently, or if you actually want to do the complete finishing work yourself, check out the course. I can save you a lot of trouble and a lot of hassles. I hope you've enjoyed this, and drop by and see me again sometime.